I always felt there was something wrong with this apartment, as if the walls were hiding ancient secrets. There was a strange chill in the air, even on warm days, and a constant feeling that someone was watching me. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Poor insulation, an overactive imagination. Maybe the creaks and whispers were just the building settling. But the feeling never left. No matter how many lamps I turned on, no matter how loud the music played, there was always a shadow just out of reach, a presence I couldn't shake. Sometimes at night, I would wake up to the sound of faint whispers in the hallway. I could never make out the words, but they were there, soft, hurried, like secrets being exchanged behind closed doors. I started locking my bedroom door, but it didn't help. The air still turned icy, and I'd hear light footsteps just outside. One day I noticed something odd in the paint on the living room wall. A slight bulge, like something was underneath. I pressed my fingers against it and the plaster crumbled. Behind it, a hollow space. Inside, I found old photographs, black and white, yellowed with age, of people I didn't recognize, all standing right where I now lived. Some were smiling. Some looked terrified. The worst part: in the back of one photo, blurry and half obscured, there was someone standing at the window. It was me. I was moving the wardrobe to paint the wall when I noticed a hollow sound coming from behind it. I tapped again, thud, thud, and froze. It didn't sound like the rest of the wall. I touched the surface. It felt like wood, but different, rougher, older, as if it didn't belong to the original structure. Curiosity took over. I ran my fingers along the edges, searching for a seam, a crack, anything. That's when I found it. A thin vertical line, almost invisible, hidden beneath years of paint. With a flathead screwdriver and a little force, the panel gave way. Behind it, there was a narrow cavity, like a shallow hidden cupboard built into the wall. Dust and cobwebs filled the space, but something else caught my eye. A small wooden box, wrapped in what looked like aged cloth. I pulled it out carefully, heart pounding, unsure of what I was even hoping to find. Inside the box were a few yellowed letters, tied with twine, and an old photograph of a woman standing in front of this very apartment. She looked solemn. Behind her, someone stood in the shadows, barely visible. The letters were written in a shaky hand. They spoke of strange noises, dreams that felt like memories, and a presence that lived within the walls. The final letter ended abruptly, mid-sentence, with a blotch of ink that trailed off the page. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of what I found, but because I kept hearing the same hollow thud over and over, as if something behind the wall was trying to get out. And with some effort, I managed to drag the furniture away. It scraped loudly against the floor, echoing through the empty room. As the dust settled, I noticed something strange. The floor beneath it was scratched, deeply and in multiple directions, as if someone had moved it many times before me. That sent shivers down my spine. The marks weren't random. They formed a pattern, like the wardrobe had been dragged back and forth, almost obsessively, always returning to the same exact spot. I knelt down, running my fingers over the grooves in the wood. Some were fresh, others were older, worn smooth with time. But I was the first tenant here in years, or at least that's what the landlord had told me. I stood up slowly, glancing at the wall the wardrobe had been pushed against. Something about it felt off. The paint was slightly discolored, like it had been retouched hastily. I knocked gently, hollow. Again, that feeling of unease crept in, as if I wasn't alone in the room, as if something or someone had been here before me, doing the exact same thing I was doing now, moving the furniture, hearing the hollow sound, feeling watched, and always putting the wardrobe back. Behind the wardrobe, an old low door was hidden in the wall. I stared at it in disbelief. There was no way I could have missed it before unless it had been deliberately concealed. It was made of dark wood, almost black, worn and cracked with age. An antique lock rested where the handle should have been, but the doorknob had been purposely removed, leaving only a circular indentation in the wood like a missing eye. Everything about it felt wrong. I crouched to examine it closer. Dust had settled thick around the frame, but the space directly in front of the door was clear, as if someone had been using it recently. I reached out, hesitating just before my fingers touched the wood. The surface was ice cold. There was no visible way to open it. No keyhole, no handle. Just that silent waiting door. I knocked gently, half expecting it to echo back. Instead, I heard something shift behind it. A soft sound. Faint. Almost like fabric brushing against stone, or footsteps on an old floor. I stumbled back, heart racing, suddenly aware of how quiet the apartment had become. No distant city sounds, no hum of the fridge, just silence. And that door, still closed, still waiting. I grabbed a screwdriver and began to force the lock. The metal groaned with each attempt, resisting as if it had been sealed for a reason. My hands ached, and sweat dripped down my back as minutes stretched into nearly an hour. But finally, with a dull crack, the mechanism gave in. The door creaked open slowly, the hinges stiff and reluctant. A gust of air escaped from within, thick, heavy, and foul. It hit me like a wave. The smell of mold and damp earth was overpowering, but beneath it there was something else, something sharper, rotten like meat left out too long, or something worse. I gagged, instinctively covering my mouth and nose, but curiosity anchored me in place. Inside, the darkness was complete. My flashlight barely cut through it, the beam swallowed by the void like it didn't want to be seen. I aimed the light downward first. There was a narrow staircase, carved from old stone, descending into the earth below the building. The steps were slick with moisture and in some places crumbled at the edges. It wasn't a room, it was a passage. I hesitated at the threshold. The air grew colder, and for a brief second I thought I heard something. Faint, distant, a dragging sound, or breathing. I turned back to look at the apartment one last time, as if it might somehow disappear once I stepped through. Then I placed one foot on the first stair and began to descend. With a flashlight in hand, I shone the beam into the darkness and saw rotting wooden steps leading down into some kind of hidden tunnel. Each one creaked under the weight of the years, swollen with moisture and soft in places, as if ready to give way at any moment. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of mold and decay, wrapping around me like a warning. I hesitated, then took a step. The tunnel walls were narrow, pressing close on either side, built from stone but coated in something darker. As I moved deeper, the flashlight revealed what made my blood run cold. Scratch marks. Dozens of them. Deep, frantic, and uneven. They covered nearly every surface. Long gouges along the stone and wood, some made by fingers, others by what looked like nails or tools. They weren't old. Some were fresh, bits of stone dust and splinters still clinging to the edges. It wasn't hard to imagine the truth. Someone had tried to get out, desperately. I reached out and traced one of the marks with my fingertips. It was jagged, violent. This wasn't someone exploring a tunnel. This was fear, panic, maybe even madness. The air grew colder the further I went, and the silence was no longer empty. It pulsed like something was breathing just beyond the edge of the light. And still, the scratch marks continued, leading deeper. I should have turned back, but something, curiosity, dread, or maybe the same pull that had drawn someone else down here long ago, kept me moving forward, step by rotting step. At the end of the tunnel was a small room, carved roughly into the earth and stone. The air was damp and stale, and the walls seemed to close in around me, as if the space itself didn't want to be found. I swept the flashlight across the room and froze. In the far corner, there was an improvised bed, just a pile of old blankets and filthy sheets laid over wooden crates. They were stained and crumpled, still holding the shape of a body. Beside it, a few empty food cans, some recent, their labels intact. Not decades old, days, maybe a week at most. A rusted fork lay nearby, stuck in a dried clump of something that might have once been beans. But what disturbed me most were the toys. They were scattered across the floor in silent disarray. A headless doll, a cracked plastic truck, a child's picture book half buried under dust. Some of them were so old their colors had faded to gray. Others looked newer, as if they'd been brought down here recently, as if someone had been living here. Until just a few days ago, I felt a chill deeper than the cold of the tunnel. Someone had been here sleeping, eating, existing in this hidden place. But why? And where were they now? I turned slowly, my flashlight trembling in my hand, suddenly aware of how quiet it had become. The kind of silence that feels watched, oppressive, intentional. Then I noticed something else. In the wall beside the bed, half hidden by shadows and hanging cloth, was another door, smaller and slightly open. But the most disturbing thing was a cracked mirror on the wall, its surface mottled with age and dust. The frame was warped, and the glass had fractured into a spiderweb of jagged lines, distorting any reflection into something grotesque. It took me a moment to notice the words, scratched directly into the glass. "He saw me again." Each letter was carved with frantic, uneven strokes, cutting deep into the mirror's surface. The trembling handwriting looked like a child's, or someone on the verge of collapse. I stared at the message, my pulse pounding in my ears. The sentence echoed in my head, over and over, growing louder with each repetition. He saw me again. Who was he, and why again? The idea that someone had been hiding down here, watching, being watched, haunted. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was obsession. I moved closer to the mirror, angling my flashlight. The cracks formed a chaotic web, but something about the way they spread from the carved letters reminded me of shattered nerves, like the message itself had broken the glass. Then, for a split second, I thought I saw something move behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Just the room. Just the darkness, just the silence pressing in. But when I turned back to the mirror, something had changed. My reflection was still there, but I wasn't alone in it. I found a dust-covered notebook half buried beneath the filthy sheets, its cover warped and brittle with age. The pages stuck together at the edges, clinging with damp and time. I opened it carefully, the spine cracking like dry bone. Inside were drawings, dozens of them, maybe more. Each one was made in pencil, crude and shaky, as if drawn by an unsteady hand, or in a hurry. But the subject was always the same. A tall man, impossibly thin, with elongated limbs and no face. Just a blank, pale oval where eyes, mouth, and features should have been. He stood in the corner of a room in every picture, sometimes near a bed, sometimes by a door, but always there, always watching. What made it worse was the second figure, smaller, curled up beneath blankets or slumped in a chair. A child, maybe, or someone trying to sleep. In every drawing, the faceless man loomed over them, never moving, just present. Page after page showed the same thing, the same room, the same silent figure, watching. I turned to the last page. The drawing was darker, pressed harder into the paper, the pencil nearly tearing through. The tall man was closer now, standing right beside the sleeping figure, and written at the bottom, in shaky letters barely legible through the smudges, were the words, "He comes closer when I dream." My hands were trembling now, because the room in the drawings, it looked exactly like the one I was standing in. I flipped through the pages again, faster this time, my breath catching in my throat. One of the drawings stood out, more detailed than the others, more recent, the pencil strokes darker, angrier, and that's when I saw it. The room in the sketch wasn't just any room. It was my room. Same faded wallpaper with the peeling corner near the ceiling. Same old nightstand with the scratch from when I dropped my keys. Even the crooked lamp I'd been meaning to fix. Everything was there, drawn with disturbing accuracy. Except for one difference. In the corner where the shadows always seemed a little too deep, he was there, the tall, faceless figure, lurking, watching. The way he was positioned, it was like he knew, like he was waiting for me to recognize the scene, to remember. I stared at the page, the room suddenly colder around me. A dull ache crept into my temples as something unspoken twisted in my chest. An awful feeling that maybe this wasn't the first time I'd seen that figure. That maybe he had been there before. In dreams, I forgot the moment I woke up. In flickers of movement just outside my vision, in that heavy feeling some nights that I wasn't really alone. I ran my finger over the drawing again, and that's when I noticed a smudged note written faintly in the margin. He likes the corner. It's where he waits until you stop pretending not to see him. When I went back to the room to check, my heart skipped a beat. The wardrobe was back in its original place. I had left it pulled away, struggling to move it hours ago. But now, it stood flush against the wall, perfectly aligned as if it had never been touched. I ran my fingers along the scratches on the floor. Gone. The scuffed marks, the dust displaced when I dragged it, all vanished without a trace. A cold shiver ran down my spine. How was this possible? Had I imagined moving it? Was something else in control here? Something that didn't want me uncovering what lay behind? I stepped closer, hesitant, my breath shallow. The wall behind the wardrobe was seamless. No hollow sounds, no hidden doors. Nothing, except the faintest whisper of cold air, brushing past my skin like a ghost. I blinked, and for a brief moment caught a shadow slipping just out of sight, where the corner of the room met the darkness. It was then I realized, some things in this apartment weren't meant to be found, or if they were, only on their terms. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was just tired. Maybe the stress was getting to me, playing tricks on my mind. The creaks, the chills, they were nothing more than the building settling or the wind outside. But that night, at exactly 3:17 a.m., everything changed. I was lying awake staring at the ceiling when I heard it. Soft footsteps, deliberate, slow, coming from behind the wall. My heart pounded as a faint, ragged breath followed, steady, uneven, almost hesitant. It wasn't the sound of the apartment settling. It was alive, close, watching. I held my breath, straining to listen. The footsteps paused, then shifted slightly, like someone pacing in a small space. I wanted to convince myself it was just the pipes or a neighbor upstairs, but deep down I knew better. Something, or someone, was behind that wall, breathing, waiting. And I wasn't alone. In the following days, strange noises became routine. Knocking echoed softly through the apartment at odd hours, sometimes rhythmic, sometimes erratic, like a code I couldn't understand. Muffled laughter floated in the air, low, haunting, almost playful, but never warm. Whispers came from the wardrobe. At first I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was the building settling or my mind unraveling. But the sounds grew clearer, sharper, impossible to ignore. One night as I lay frozen in bed, the air thick with silence, a voice whispered so clearly it sent chills down my spine. "You found me." The words hung in the darkness like a confession, a warning. I stared at the wardrobe, heart hammering, as if it might open on its own, but it stayed shut. For now. I called the former tenant. The number was still saved in the lease documents. My fingers trembled as I pressed the phone to my ear, heart pounding with a mix of hope and dread. The line rang once, twice. Then he answered, but there was only silence on the other end. No greeting, no hesitation, just a heavy, unsettling quiet. I cleared my throat and explained about the door, the hidden tunnel, the strange smells, the scratches on the walls. After a long pause, he finally spoke. His voice was low, almost a whisper, edged with something like fear or regret. "You opened it, didn't you? Now he knows." The line went dead. I was left staring at the phone, a cold wave washing over me. Whoever or whatever was behind that door wasn't just some forgotten secret. It was waiting. And now it was aware. Since then, things began to unravel. I started seeing shadows where there were none, dark shapes flickering at the edge of my vision, vanishing the moment I tried to focus on them. Hallways stretched longer, corners grew deeper, and the silence in the apartment became heavier, as if something unseen was pressing close. My reflection in the mirror became unreliable. Sometimes it moved differently from me. A delayed blink, a subtle smirk that I hadn't made. Other times it stared back with empty eyes as if trying to communicate something I couldn't understand. And worst of all, I'd wake up with small handprints on my sheets. Tiny, damp impressions that didn't belong to me. Cold fingers tracing shapes that no one should be touching. I told myself it was exhaustion, a trick of the mind. But deep down, I knew the truth. Since that door opened, I was no longer alone. I decided to sleep away from home for a few days, hoping the distance would clear my mind and calm the growing unease. Each night in a different place, away from the apartment's suffocating shadows. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head. But on the last night, just as I was settling into bed, my phone buzzed. A message from my own number. I froze. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside was a photo. My room. Taken from the corner. Exactly where the figure stood in the drawings. The same dark, silent corner where shadows seem to gather. Where he waits. The chill that ran down my spine was colder than any winter night. Because the message wasn't just a warning. It was a proof. Proof that I was never really alone. When I came back, everything seemed calm. The apartment was quiet, almost unnervingly so. The heavy weight of dread I'd carried felt momentarily lighter, as if the darkness had retreated. But then, when I opened the wardrobe to grab some clothes, my breath caught in my throat. Inside, resting on the top shelf, was a doll, one I had never seen before. Its fabric was faded and stained, as if it had been there a long time but carefully hidden. The most disturbing thing were its eyes, sewn shut with thick black thread, and its smile carved into the cloth with a blade, jagged and cruel. It looked alive. I wanted to throw it away, burn it even, but my hands wouldn't move. I felt frozen, caught in a silent conversation with that twisted little face, because the doll wasn't just a toy. It was a message, and I was the one it was meant for. At the back of the wardrobe, something new caught my eye. Faint at first, but unmistakable. A message, carved deep into the wood. I've always lived here. The letters were uneven, scratched as if with desperate fingernails. Around them, dark stains marred the surface, dried blood, crusted and faded, but unmistakably there. I ran my fingers over the carving, feeling the rough grooves beneath my skin. The words burned into my mind like a warning, a confession, and a curse all at once. Always lived here. Not just the tenant before me, not just the apartment. Someone else. Something else. Something that never left. Now, every time I look in the mirror, I see his silhouette behind me. A tall, faceless shadow lingering just beyond the edge of the glass, watching silently. But whenever I turn around, there's nothing. Only silence. And the wardrobe, slightly open. Yesterday, I found something in the pocket of my jacket. A small key, cold and heavy in my hand, its metal surface worn and scratched, as if it had been used countless times before. A key to a door I swore I had closed forever. My heart raced as I stared at it, the weight of what it might unlock pressing down on me, because some doors, once opened, never truly stay shut.